In Act 1, Scene 3 of Shakespeare's Macbeth, Banquo, aghast, describes the three witches as withered and so wild in their attire, not looking like the inhabitants of the earth, and having choppy fingers, skinny lips, and beards. His companion Macbeth becomes intrigued by these hideous-looking women and their mesmeric predictions. His subsequent confidence in their prophecies contributes directly to his own tragic downfall. However, the extent to which the witches can be blamed for Macbeth's descent from most worthy Thane to dead butcher will inevitably vary between productions. Shakespeare's texts refuse to offer simplistic explanations for deeds fueled by complex motivating forces. So this essay will look closely at the witches in three extremely different movie versions of the play. Polanski's 1971 Playboy-funded classic, Wright's 2006 gangster romp, and Gould's excellent 2010 version. Set within a claustrophobic mid-20th century Soviet-style dictatorship, it would explore the contrasting presentations of the witches, the settings they inhabit, and their interactions with Macbeth before analysing their role in the latter's tragic downfall. Three films based on the same text, using only Shakespeare's language, bar a few innocuous tweaks in Wright's gangster romp. Yet the films and their witches are fascinatingly different, affecting the way in which we view and feel for the man they influence, as well as the world he inhabits. The plan is for you to enjoy this. Let's start those opening credits. In order to make this video easier to follow for those of you only interested in one of the aforementioned Macbeth films, I will analyse each in chronological order of production, starting with Polanski, followed by Wright, and then finally looking at arguably the most interesting and lesser known interpretation, Gould's 2010 movie. Feel free to skip directly to the film you're interested in. The timings for each one are shown within the description box below. However, by including short, fair use clips from each movie, I hope that it is unnecessary for you to have seen each movie in order to understand and follow my analysis and points, and consequently develop your own thinking and understanding of the play. Indeed, my naive hope is that by including these clips, some of you may be inspired to go out and purchase the full movie version. They're all worth watching. So, Polanski's Witches. Let's have a look at their first appearance in the play.
When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won.
Well, from a physical point of view, they come closest to Banquo's Act 1, Scene 3 description. Their attire, filthy rags, flowing capes, is certainly withered and so wild. The long matted hair of one and the strange black skull cap and disfigured facial skin of another make them seem otherworldly, whilst there is an impression of unsightly wisps of chin hair, possibly an inaccurate one, which links to Banquo's references to beards. But what I find particularly interesting and effective about Polanski's Witches is their decrepitude. Following their rasping pronouncement about needing to meet with Macbeth, they slowly creak off across the beach, wheeling their ramshackle barrow, head slightly bowed, and one witch seemingly hunchbacked. Physically, Macbeth could snap any one of them in two within a split second. Physically, they pose no threat, danger, or sexual interest to him whatsoever. Free from the distraction of positive visual stimulus or threat, there can be no question of feeling attracted to or physically endangered by the witches. The audience can then focus more sharply on what they say and how they say it. In this scene, the overwhelming feeling is of disquiet at these quiet, scraping voices. Voices which in discordant unison concur that fair is foul and foul is fair. And so Polanski's witches, filthy, tramp-like, physically weak, wispy, contrast sharply to both Macbeth and the kind of folk a successful fighter and vigorous quasher of enemy rebels would be expected to associate himself with. The setting in which the witches are seen is similarly otherworldly. In their first appearance, they are on a deserted, dusky beach with no sign of vibrant human life anywhere. And in Act 1, Scene 3, they hobble around wild, craggy moors before retreating into an underground cave. These women have apparently no links at all to the world Macbeth inhabits. Whereas his kind are aristocratic and physically strong, these women are stooping, scraggly goat herders. Whereas he moves from castle to fight, feast and quaff, they scrabble around in the beach and live shadowy existences amongst the raw elements. This interpretation is reasonably faithful to Shakespeare's original text, which positions the witches in an open place with thunder and lightning in Act 1, Scene 1, a heath with thunder in Act 1, Scene 3, and a dark cave with a boiling cauldron in Act 4, Scene 1. Macbeth is both repulsed and intrigued by the witches' otherworldliness and their wild alien settings, and this makes him more likely to believe that they may possess powers not normally granted to conventional human beings, including prophesying the future. However, Polanski alters the dynamics of Shakespeare's opening scene with this significant inclusion. Whereas the language of Shakespeare's Act 1, Scene 1 implies general malignity from three older women, here Polanski's women bearing an arm, clenching a dagger, confirms that they hold superstitious beliefs and or powers, which would be suspected from the references to witches' familiars, Grey Malkin and Paddock, and implies that they desire death via murder. Given that they have stated that they will subsequently meet Macbeth upon a heath, the obvious assumption is that their plan is for Macbeth to commit murder. This addition to the text results in a more disturbing visual opening sequence to the film. Watching the witches carefully unwrap a severed limb from a filthy rag and place a dagger carefully in its hand exponentially compounds the sense of unease at these women's strange appearance, crackly voices and subversive chorus. However, such an addition inevitably affects later questions as to the extent Macbeth had full control and therefore responsibility over his own actions. There is a real difference between a man committing murder because he shares his wife's ambitions and some women have found out about a promotion before him, and a man committing murder because it has unequivocally been predestined by malignant forces. Of course, having a dagger buried in the sand with a lopped limb does not necessarily mean that in Polanski's interpretation of Shakespeare's more superstitious world, Macbeth has to kill Duncan. The fact that he initially decides to pull out of the plot in Act 1, Scene 7 suggests the presence of a self-determining conscience, albeit one which all too rapidly cedes to evil. But it does surely remove some of Macbeth's culpability for his actions. In Act 1, Scene 3, Macbeth meets the witches for the first time. Polanski cuts the first 37 lines of Shakespeare's original. To some limited extent, he has reflected the malignity of lines such as "I'll drain him dry as hay" in the earlier dagger burying stunt, although not the sexual sadism or the foreshadowing of the Macbeth's suffering in relation to sleep, meaning that the scene starts with Macbeth's unconscious evocation of the witches through his description of the weather. What I find interesting here is the witches' seeming indifference and detachment to Macbeth during their exchanges. Have a look.
Speak if you can. What are you?
All hail, Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis.
All hail, Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor.
All hail, Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter.
When Macbeth asks his question, the skull-capped witch does not initially look up from vigorously scratching the back of the matted hair witch. When she does respond, she stays where she is and continues to scratch her fellow's curiously desexualised bare back. It is steaming with rain in the background, and the men are on a high level on horseback. Yet the first witch doesn't raise her voice to ensure she is heard. Instead, she speaks clearly with quiet authority. It is as though the words themselves, rather than the speaker, carry greater significance, making conventional conversational gestures, such as stopping what you're doing, moving closer to someone, speaking louder in order to say something important, redundant. Indeed, in Polanski's production, it is surely the apparently casual manner in which the prophecies are delivered which makes them all the more intriguing to their potential beneficiaries. Polanski makes another significant change to Shakespeare's original at the end of this exchange. Whereas Banquo remains on horseback throughout the conversation, Macbeth dismounts and follows the seemingly disinterested witches to question them further as they amble down the mountainside with a goat.
Stay, you imperfect speakers. Tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I am Thane of Glamis. But how of Cawdor? Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence. Or why upon this blasted heath you stop our way with such prophetic greeting. Whither are they vanished? Into the air.
In Shakespeare's original, the stage directions state that the witches vanish, having ignored Macbeth's impotent pleas for further clarification on their prophecies. Not so here. Polanski's Macbeth sees the witches head down into an underground cavern, which could easily be located again if necessary, and indeed is, in Act 4, Scene 1. Moreover, the further twist is that Macbeth, on the spur of the moment, elects to lie to Banquo, still watching from afar on his horse, by telling him that the witches have vanished into the air, unlike in Shakespeare, when he can be assumed to be speaking literally. The viewer is left with the impression that Macbeth is intrigued and fired up by future possibilities, and is quick thinking and manipulative enough to ensure that in the future he alone, and not Banquo, will be able to locate the witches in order to use them further. I wonder whether a further consequence of this fixed physical location for the witches is a psychological one. When writing to his wife, when planning murder in order to ensure such prophecies are fulfilled as rapidly as possible, Polanski's Macbeth has the curious security of knowing that he can potentially return to his prophesiers at any point he chooses. Does that give him the added confidence to carry out the murder, knowing that those who have indirectly suggested it is his destiny have not vanished into the air to form the backdrop of a distinctive weird dream, but are there quietly waiting for him within their craggy underground cavern? Polanski, like the vast majority of theatre and movie directors including Wright and Goold, chooses to cut Act 3, Scene 5, the scene in which the three witches are given a rollicking by their superior, the witch goddess Hecate. And so the next time the witches are seen is indeed when Macbeth returns to their subterranean hideout. This time there's loads of them, and they're all naked. Take a look.
By the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes.
What I find remarkable about this scene is its utter unsexiness. Macbeth has stumbled into a room full of naked women, some of them youngish, and yet, as his expression shows, he's utterly repulsed by what he sees. Polanski's portrayal continues to emphasise the huge chasm between Macbeth and the witches. Macbeth is strong and aristocratic, the witches are wild and decrepit. Macbeth abides in castles. The witches seem content to lope around the wild, rugged moors. And in this scene, Macbeth is clothed in fine robes, and a huge rag and bone medley of witches are naked. These women have wild, matted hair and stand and stare at Macbeth as he enters, whilst one of the original witches stirs a heated by fire cauldron, resulting in a smoky cave and half-flickering shadows. Macbeth has stumbled into a parallel universe, which he cannot associate with in any way, even through the age-old male desire for voluptuous female flesh. And so, ironically, the nudity only results in a reversal of usual expectations. It is Macbeth himself who's vulnerable, not the naked women, as he finds himself in a world which he didn't previously realise existed, which he doesn't understand, and which he must now impotently and asexually place his trust. Macbeth drinks a goblet of the cauldron's disgusting potion, which facilitates the appearance of the falsely reassuring three apparitions. However, unlike in Shakespeare, note that Polanski chooses to have Macbeth present when the witches chant about the ingredients included within the nauseating brew.
Nose of Turpin, Tartar's lips, severed in the moon's eclipse.
Fillet of a penny snake, in the cauldron boil and bake.
Polanski's change gives Macbeth a more detailed, explicit insight into the workings of the witches and their necromantic potion. In this clip, across the flickering light of the cave, he sees human body parts being added, and yet he still goes ahead and drinks the devilish cocktail. Another change is that in Shakespeare's original, Macbeth dominates the dialogue when he enters and delivers a long anaphoric speech to rhetorically paint a picture of destruction in numerous contexts before asking for a response to his request. The effect of this is to spotlight both Macbeth's rhetorical fire through his apocalyptic descriptions and to emphasise his desperation to obtain devilish reassurance about his inner fears and the future. Polanski cut such references to corn being flattened, castles crashing down, and the structure of palaces and pyramids being destroyed, and the result is an intensification of the impression of vulnerable desperation. Polanski's Macbeth is denied the illusory sense of power through language, and so just seems a lost little man within a devil's sub-kingdom of female flesh, body parts, and firelight. He also has more time to consider and take in his surroundings than Shakespeare's original character, which, given that he freely participates in the witch's necromantic activity, highlights the extent to which he has come to rely on their equivocations. And so, to what extent do the witches in Polanski cause Macbeth's downfall? This is a complex question without an easy answer, but another addition by Polanski towards the end of the film hints strongly at Lady Macbeth's views on the subject. Just before she kills herself, she takes out and rereads a certain letter her husband wrote to her during happier times.
They met me in the day of success, and I have learnt by the perfectest report they have more in them than mortal knowledge.
The pronoun they obviously refers to the witches, and the fact Lady Macbeth rereads this letter just before killing herself indicates that she feels her husband's first meeting with them was the crucial trigger which brought on a catastrophic chain of events and ultimately the necessity of ending her own life. Lady Macbeth appears to be indirectly blaming the witches for the destruction of their sanity and lives. Of course, Shakespeare's text takes issue with such simplistic interpretations. After all, Banquo also met the witches and was given some equally exciting predictions about his future. If he was able to ignore the instruments of darkness, then why not Macbeth as well? And this question leads us on nicely to the second movie I'd like to analyse in this essay, Jeffrey Wright's 2006 gangster thriller starring Sam Worthington in the title role. In this version, Banquo doesn't meet the witches with Macbeth in the dingy drug den known as the Corridor nightclub, resulting in a question which is normally reserved for Banquo's ghost during the banquet scene or the Act 2 Scene 1 dagger? Do they actually exist? Or could they be a false creation proceeding from a heat-oppressed or sex-starved brain? Wright's witches, young, pretty schoolgirls, are first seen in a graveyard behaving like teenage delinquents. Armed with screwdrivers, spray cans and a hammer, they cause irritating damage to statues and tombstones. Unlike Shakespeare's and Polanski's, these witches are young and attractive, nothing withered, wild, choppy or bearded about any of them, and so bear a closer resemblance to those presented in one of Shakespeare's source texts, the Chronicles of Scotland. With their youth comes the greater potential for independent, energetic endeavour, which may or may not be malign in focus, whereas Polanski's witches stoop, cackle and slowly lug a heavy cart. Wright's witches in this opening sequence speak with lovely, lilting Australian voices, act purposefully and walk with vigour. Although their acts cause irreverent damage to tombstones rather than people, and although when they leave the cemetery they trot past Macbeth apparently respectfully, the viewer is nonetheless left with a sense that these girls could represent a physical threat of some kind, as well as the more manipulative one implied by their words in Act 1, Scene 1. It is in Act 1, Scene 3 that Macbeth first meets the witches, although Wright chooses to have Macbeth seeing them in the graveyard at the beginning of the film, and Wright's changes here merit discussion. With the action moved from Scotland to the modern-day Melbourne underworld, to be Thane of Cawdor is to own and to manage the grubby Cawdor nightclub. Macbeth and Banquo have successfully captured the Thane of Cawdor following his disloyal liaisons with a rival gang led by MacDonald in a drugs deal, and are now relaxing, awaiting their crime boss Duncan's arrival. We're not told exactly what kind of drug, but it seems likely that Macbeth has taken some kind of hallucinogenic pill, probably LSD. Banquo also indulges, but the drug doesn't agree with his system, leaving him to head off to the loos to vomit. Whilst he is staggering and throwing up, Macbeth does this. His pupils are staring, and his decision to randomly turn on the special effects smoke after popping a pill suggests that Macbeth wants to hallucinate, wants the seemingly out-of-world experience of perceiving something which is actually an illusory product of his own altered consciousness as real. Now, of course, you also experience real events and occurrences when hallucinating, but it can be harder to pinpoint reality from fantasy, which is presumably deemed part of the creative fun of drug taking. With trance-style music on the nightclub speakers and the stage slowly filling up with smoke, Macbeth recognises the same girls he saw at the cemetery.
Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air.
So foul and fair a day I have not seen. Or what are these, huh? That look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it.
Although Wright uses Shakespeare's language, his cuts and repositionings of lines are revealing and alter our perception both of the witches and Macbeth. In this clip, Wright's witches deliver their "fair is foul" line directly to Macbeth, unlike in Shakespeare's original, when it is a faintly ominous couplet spoken with only the witches on stage amidst thunder and lightning. With Wright's witches wearing flimsy, skimpy and Somerset outfits as they share out this famous refrain, the words inevitably have a completely different feel to them. Flirty, enticing, beguiling. In this production, these lines contain an attractive, unspecified challenge for Macbeth to align himself more closely with wicked foulness, which of course is far sexier than its counterpart, straight-laced goodness. And so when Wright's Macbeth says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," he is not describing the filthy weather whilst acknowledging their success in battle to Banquo, as in Shakespeare's original, but responding gleefully to the witch's implicit, flirty challenge to become a little naughtier. Whereas "So foul and fair a day" would conventionally provide audiences with a ghostly, ominous echo about the witch's potential influence on Macbeth, here it is used to show that Macbeth is ready and willing to engage with such sexy and apparently up for it teenage girls. The question, of course, is whether Macbeth is hallucinating the whole encounter. Banquo is still in the bogs, resulting in Wright's rather awkward rewriting of the prophecies about Banquo's descendants.
My noble partner Banquo. With him you speak not.
Hail! Hail, Banquo. Banquo shall be lesser than Macbeth and greater.
It doesn't really work, does it? Macbeth points out the bleeding obvious when he says that the witches aren't speaking with Banquo. Of course not, he's puking in the loose. Even more pertinently, the idea that the witches can be hailing Banquo whilst addressing Macbeth is unconvincing and artificial. However, this change does mean that there are no other human beings who can confirm the existence of the witches. And indeed, when Macbeth asks Banquo, "Saw you the weird sisters?" and Wright has lifted this line from Act 4, Scene 1, where it is originally addressed to Lennox, Banquo's reaction propagates a suspicion that Macbeth has imagined the entire sexy encounter.
Saw you the weird sisters.
No, my lord.
So if the witches are merely the product of a testosterone-charged virile man's imagination, how does this affect our reading of the text? Well, it implies that Macbeth's downfall is far more of his own making. Blame cannot be partially assigned to malign supernatural forces. Moreover, the physical appearance and behaviour of the witches in Wright's production hint at something deprived and ignoble in Macbeth's character, which in turn reduces the tragedy of his downfall. In Shakespeare, we empathise enormously with the demise of such a loyal, noble, aristocratic thane, whose heart becomes corrupted by a combination of ambition, spousal nagging, and supernatural promptings. By contrast, in Wright, we are far less likely to care as much about the demise of a once loyal gangster, particularly if we decide that his encounters with the witches, teenagers first seen for real in their school uniforms and then imagined in sexy Anne Summers outfits and later naked, are a product of his own imagination. This theory seems even more convincing when we turn to Wright's portrayal of Act 4, Scene 1, the boiling cauldron scene. Whereas in Shakespeare's original, Macbeth elects to go to the weird sisters, in Wright, the witches come to him when he is asleep, resulting in the possibility that he may be dreaming the entire encounter. And it is not only the witch who is naked, but the other two as well. Macbeth heads downstairs and finds them mixing an alarming brew of weird human and animal body parts. As in Polanski, Macbeth is present during the mixing of ingredients and the chanting, meaning that he gleans a full, horrifying understanding of the nuts and bolts of necromantic ways. The fact that Macbeth appears so comfortable around such sickening practices illustrates the extent to which a previously loyal, upstanding member, albeit of a criminal community in Wright's film, has become dehumanised to workings which can only be associated with the devil. The camera shows nauseating close-ups of worms, eels, eyes and blood, and yet look how cockily confident Macbeth is in this clip.
Lizard's leg and owlet's wing.
Scale of dragon, tooth of wolf.
Witch's mummy.
I conjure you by that which you profess, however you come to know it. Answer me.
Of course, an additional factor in Wright's production is that the lure of 3 smiling, pouting, naked teenagers may well be sufficient to override any anxieties felt about the presence of dead animal parts within neat bowls and pans in his kitchen. Either way, the audience is left with the impression of degenerate spiritual and moral deterioration. Earlier in this essay, I suggested that in Polanski's production, Lady Macbeth pinned a significant amount of blame on the witches for the destruction of her husband and her own peace of mind and ultimately lives. What can be said about the role of the witches in Wright's film? Well, given that they are only seen by Macbeth, and following their first appearance in the graveyard only when he has just taken drugs or been sleeping, the most likely explanation is that they are products of Macbeth's disturbed imagination. Seen in this light, Wright's portrayal of the witches extends and develops Shakespeare's exploration of the potential for the human mind to disintegrate into evil thoughts and twisted, distorted chaos. Whereas Shakespeare suggests that personal ambition, a desire to live up to society's construct of manliness and a degree of manipulation can lead to murder, swiftly followed by mental breakdown. Wright adds a different dimension. The human mind, especially but not exclusively when distorted by hallucinogenic drugs, has an extraordinary potential for vivid, mind-bending, disturbing fantasies which can impact disastrously upon the way you choose to live your life. Finally, let's look at the witches in Gould's 2010 production, and what a contrast they are to those presented in Polanski and Wright. They appear to be merely nurses, parts of a supporting background medical team, whilst war rages above them. Here's their first appearance.
My gaseous Christ! So well thy words become thee as thy wounds, they smack of honour both. Go, get him, surgeons!
When shall we 3 meet again?
It's damn clever, isn't it? And unlike Wright's awkward plonking of Saw You the Weird Sisters into his equivalent of Act 1 Scene 3, the movement of lines from Act 1 Scene 2 prior to Act 1 Scene 1 really works. By delaying the revelation that the 3 nurses are Shakespeare's witches, the audience is lulled into thinking that the women are insignificant yet benign members of a medical team supporting the efforts of King Duncan and his army. When in company with Duncan, the bleeding captain and other uniformed officers, the 3 women do not say anything. They appear to be acting efficiently, doing everything they can to tend to the captain's honourable weeping gashes. Yet, once Duncan and co have departed, the first witch takes out a syringe which, far from saving the captain, results in him having a catastrophic, fatal heart attack. With the famous lines, "When shall we 3 meet again?" the audience realises that A, the injection administered to the captain was almost certainly a deliberate act of murder, and B, that they are Shakespeare's witches disguised as nurses. The introduction of an element of disguise is genius and makes the witches seem far more immediately dangerous than their more subtle, slower burning Shakespearean counterparts. Not only have they chosen disguises which imply a degree of compassion, if only professionally, but they appear to be an integral part of the besieged underground community. In the clip just shown, they appear metres from the king, who doesn't take a blind bit of notice of them. Yet their subsequent injection and revelatory opening question makes the audience realise just how dangerous they are. And it is a notable feature of this entire production how integrated the witches are throughout. Whereas in Shakespeare and Polanski, the witches are a seismic distance from Macbeth, both in terms of appearance and abode. In Goold, the witches always seem to be around, lurking in the background. When Duncan comes to dine with Macbeth, the witches can be seen preparing the meat with large carving knives. When Macbeth is king and holds a banquet, there they are again, serving up wine. Their almost permanent lurking presence results in a greater sense than in Shakespeare that Macbeth may not be in full control of his fates. When analysing Polanski's witches earlier, I talked about their lack of conversational gestures when casually advising Macbeth that he will be king hereafter, and the idea that Macbeth focuses all the more on what is being said as a result. There is a similar disdain for conversational gestures in this production, but what is markedly different is the intensity with which the witches speak.
When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?
When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won.
That'll be the set of sun.
The first witch pronounces that it meets with determined relish, whilst the rolled r of rain results in a growl-like aggressive sound. Whereas Shakespeare's witches appear to have other business to deal with, such as killing swine and tormenting sailors, Gould's witches' intense enunciation makes them seem supremely and terrifyingly focused on their current projects. Given that they have already killed off the bleeding captain, the likelihood is that their plans for Macbeth similarly and ominously incorporate death and suffering. Moreover, their determined manner, established position within the underground community, and their ruthlessness in dispatching of the captain suggest that they will be formidable foes to oppose. In Wright's production, much of Macbeth's interactions with the witches are characterised by close near-body contact and sensual mangling of Shakespearean verse. Not so here. Macbeth and Banquo first meet the witches standing in a curious triangular formation within a huge empty banqueting hall.
What are these? That look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on't. Live you? Or are you aught that man may question?
The banqueting hall is bathed in shadows, but the witches stand centrally towards the back, with light pouring down from a ceiling window, encircling the three women in light. The triangle formation, the unnatural distance between the three women, their utter stillness, and the coordinated way in which they move their fingers to their lips at the same time to call for silence, give the impression that these women are partaking in some kind of strange, otherworldly, deadly serious ritual. The audience have previously seen the women kill off the captain, and so will be aware that their intent must be malign. However, this malignity cannot be immediately apparent to Macbeth and Banquo. On the one hand, the women's clothing, nurse uniforms and white veils imply benignity, whilst their triangle formation echoes the Christian Holy Trinity, something which is reinforced by the bright white light which pours down upon them. On the other hand, one of the witches is alarmingly holding a hacksaw, and the triangle formation is also historically associated with the gate of hell. As in Shakespeare, it is the fact that the witch's evil is not expressed or revealed explicitly to Macbeth, although it is to the audience, which enables the audience to empathise far more with his plight in later scenes. Another interesting addition from Goold is the strange positioning of a hanging coat, blood bag and glasses. Let's rewind to see the witch's frantic preparations prior to meeting Macbeth for the first time in Act 1, Scene 3.
Macbeth doth come.
The charms wound up.
Although it is not completely clear, the flashing glimpse of a bulging bloody heart from within the hanging overcoats implies that the witches have used a human body part in order to spark demonic life into this curious charm. And Gould's decision to have a literal representation of the charm within the bespectacled blood-bag come overcoat creation means that both Macbeth and the audience have visual reminders of their potential power and influence, even when those witches are not present. Earlier in this essay I talked about the fact that Gould's witches always seem to be around in this production, thus making it even harder for Macbeth to resist their declarations about his and his country's fate. Well, their creation of this physical charm helps them remain within Macbeth's consciousness to an even greater extent. Have a look at this clip taken after Ross and co have arrived within the same huge empty banqueting hall to deliver the astonishing news that Macbeth has been promoted to Thane of Cawdor. Here, Banquo reflects on the dangers of paying too much attention to those supernatural solicity.
But 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths.
It may be ultimately to win Macbeth to his harm, but this weird physical charm emphasises categorically that the witches exist, and that unlike in Wright's production, they cannot be dismissed as figments of fantasy. The glasses metaphorically continue to stare at Macbeth through blood-bag eyes as a reminder of an alternative parallel universe, which apparently has the power to influence the workings of his own human position within society. As perhaps is to be expected from a film production which was adapted from an extremely successful stage performance in the 2007 Chichester Festival, Goold resists the attempt to use nudity in his portrayal of either the witches or Lady Macbeth. And so whereas in Polanski, in Act 4 Scene 1, Macbeth ventures into a terrifying cauldron of voluptuous naked female flesh, and in Wright, Macbeth finds that schoolgirls have pleasingly disrobed, conveniently, within his own house, Goold continues to develop the necromantic link between the witches and dead bodies. My favourite apparition is the third.
Listen, but speak not to it. Feel iron metals proud, and take no care who chase, who press, or where conspirers are. Macbeth shall never vanquish thee, until great Burnham Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him.
That can never be!
There are 3 bodies laid out within the curtain-off area, and each one is used to generate the electricity required to produce the apparition. However, this is the only one which forces Macbeth to experience an electric shock for the duration of the prophecy. As every volt charges through his body, he winces with pain, hands joined with the witch on top of the corpse. Just as Polanski's and Wright's Macbeth drinking the disgusting potion known full well that it contains human and animal body parts illustrate the extent of their fall from noble dignity to desperate dissolution, so Gould's Macbeth's willingness to embrace a 20-second electric shock whilst touching a random dead body shows that he will now stoop to anything in a vain attempt to provide reassurances about his desperate future. And so we return to questions about the witches and the degree to which they influences Macbeth's downfall. Well, out of all the productions explored in this essay, in Goold the witches have by far the biggest influence. As an integral part of the underground community, they are ever present. Whether it is carving up meat, tending to injured soldiers, or pouring wine, wheeling away Lady Macbeth's body to the devil, they are there. And if they're not, their weird charm reminds Macbeth and the audience of their words and fixed attentions about the future. Even more significantly, in Gould's production, they literally stop Macbeth killing Macduff. Watch the closing stages of their Act 5 Scene 8 battle.
Enough.
Macbeth's expression is resigned, and he gives a rueful smile before submitting to his fate. Goold makes it crystal clear that by the end, Macbeth recognises that it is his fate to die. He has simply been a pawn in the hands of higher powers. Now, my view is that Shakespeare's original text is more ambiguous, and that Shakespeare's Macbeth had more of an opportunity to resist the instruments of darkness than Gould's. Still, both Gould's and Shakespeare's texts stress the follies of unrestrained vaulting ambition, and of failing to recognise that individual human beings are ultimately tiny specks of insignificance within a huge, unknown universe. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, exploring the witches of Macbeth in Roman Polanski's, Jeffrey Wright's and Rupert Gould's productions. Many thanks for watching.